Welcome to today's Conversation Series program, Making People Your Priority, the Best Path Forward, hosted by Mary-Clare Race, Chief Innovation and Product Officer for LHH. We're talking with Deanna Mulligan, Board Chair of Guardian Life Insurance Company of America and author of Higher Purpose, as well as Lisa Lewin, CEO of General Assembly, and Ranjit de Sousa, President of LHH. Today, Mary-Clare, Deanna, Lisa, and Ranjit are talking about how smart companies are writing a new talent strategy playbook that will address barriers to rebuilding your workforce and help close the skills gap while achieving a higher purpose that drives long-term success. We will be taking questions about halfway through the program. Please use the Q&A function to enter your questions anytime during the session, and we will respond to as many questions as possible. Over to you, Mary-Clare.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to our conversation today. Thank you for joining us. Now, to preserve the bandwidth today, you're not actually going to be seeing me, but you will be hearing me. You'll be seeing our panelists here before you. And I'm super excited to be hosting the conversation. I know we're in for a really thought-provoking conversation with our panel. As you heard in the introduction, I'm the Chief Innovation and Product Officer here at LHH. And for those of you who are new to LHH, we help companies see the possibilities in their people through assessments, coaching, upskilling, and career transitioning. The companies who work with us are able to realize the untapped potential within their own workforce, which ultimately results in increased productivity and engagement and brand affinity. So that's a little bit about LHH. Now we're going to find out a little bit about our panel. So I'll ask them each to introduce themselves to you. And Deanna, I'm going to begin with you.
Well, thank you. Good day, everyone. I'm Deanna Mulligan. I am the board chair of Guardian Life Insurance Company of America. Guardian is a Fortune 250 company, and we are owned by our policyholders. I'm also the author of the book, Higher Purpose, How Smart Companies Can Fill the Skills Gap, which is coming out soon.
Great, thank you, Deanna. And Lisa?
Hi, everybody. My name is Lisa Lewin. I'm the CEO of General Assembly, and we are dedicated to helping thousands of people upskill and reskill to be ready for jobs for the increasingly digital future. And I've spent most of the last 20 years leading companies in the college and career education sector, as well as serving as an advisor to companies trying to successfully navigate digital transformation and the future of work. Great to be here.
Thank you, Lisa. And Ranjit, over to you.
Thank you, MC, and great to be here today. I lead LHH, and in that capacity, I have the privilege to hear a lot from CHROs and CEOs across the globe. And that's kind of given me the perspective that we are standing in front of one of the biggest changes in the world of work that we've seen in the last maybe 150 years. And so I'm really excited to be here on the panel today because I think we'll be touching on some of those questions, key questions which we really need to solve if we want to make the future of work actually work for everyone. So really excited to be here, and back to you, MC.
Thank you, Ranjit, and thank you the rest of the panel, and welcome. I'm very much looking forward to having a good conversation with you. Before we kick that off, though, I'm also keen to get a sense of who everyone is out there joining us today. And specifically, I'm curious to know a little bit about your current strategy around ensuring the future employability of your workforce. So if I can ask you to take this quick poll that should have popped up on your screen right now, and the question that we would love to hear your response to is, to meet future workforce needs, my company is either re and upskilling current employees and encouraging internal redeployment, reshaping the workforce by exiting employees whose skills have become obsolete and hiring those with new skills. Option 3, not taking significant action. We're confident our people have the right skills for the future. Option 4, not thinking about this. We don't have a strategy on future-proofing the workforce. Or you might prefer not to say. So if everyone could just take a quick look at that and give us your response, and we'll see how it pans out. Feels like we need a drum roll or something here. Very curious to see the mix. Ah, there we go. So very interesting. Almost half of you joining are thinking about reskilling and upskilling and how you might be able to encourage internal redeployment, and then others perhaps moving towards that, but maybe not quite sure how. And yeah, some people are not quite thinking about it just yet, but maybe a strategy on this is something that's part of your future. So yes, that is really helpful. And we can take that poll down now, honestly, thank you. And we'll get into our discussion, and I'm sure we'll want to pick up on some of those results as we go through. So here we are, mid-October, in a year like no other, where the very fabric of our lives has been radically shifted, I think, in ways that none of us could have imagined. And I think more than ever now, our organizations are facing daunting obstacles on the path toward transformation, including this need to identify talent to fill an ever-widening skills and capabilities gap. The rapid change that will come about as a result of this pandemic, alongside the ongoing pace of change in technology, which, you know, if anything, it certainly hasn't lessened, and if anything has quickened, will certainly revolutionize nearly every job. It will eliminate some, and it's going to create new forms of work that we've yet to imagine. We've already seen that this year. So I think the question we are really wanting to get into today is, how can we ensure a future for our people where they survive and thrive in the face of increasingly drastic change? So let's get into it. And Deanna, I'm going to start with you, because I know that putting people first in this situation is core, not just to your organization's culture, but also core to you and your own values and beliefs. And I'd love to hear a little bit about the experiences that have helped to inform your perspective on this topic.
Thanks, Mary-Clare. Well, at Guardian, we have 3 core values that really drive everything we do. Guardian is 160 years old this year, and these values have been with us for a long time, and it's really how we run the company. So the first one is, we do the right thing, then people count, and we hold ourselves to very high standards. And so when those are the 3 values that are driving everything your company does, I think it's just natural to think about your people and reskilling and how to help them adapt to, as you remarked earlier, this ever-changing, rapidly changing world. And we also describe ourselves as a purpose-driven organization. As an insurance company, we're here with people at the worst times of their lives, and they buy products from us knowing that 50, 60, 70 years later, potentially, they may need our product, and we're here to pay. So we tell all of our new recruits, we are a purpose-driven organization. When you join Guardian, you sign on to our purpose. And we believe it's helpful. People really want meaning in what they do. They work for money, but they really work for meaning. And I think in these difficult times, more than ever, it's the leader's job to provide meaning, and reskilling is a part of that for us.
Yeah, great. And I have to say, and I promise this isn't a deliberate plug on your book, but I really enjoyed getting an early preview of it. And what I loved was just the wealth of human stories that you brought to life through that, and really talked about that with such passion. And I'd love you to tell me a little bit more about how, as the leader of Guardian Life, how did you actually bring this sense of purpose to life in your organization? Because we all know it's not an easy feat to really make this part of the beating heart of the organization.
Well, we've done this in sort of large and small ways, and in general and specific. So, for example, one general way that we bring this reskilling opportunity to life is we have very generous tuition reimbursement benefits for employees, about $12,500 a year. And they're allowed to use that tuition for any purpose, any kind of course they want. It doesn't have to be related to Guardian. So that's a general way that we try to promote a learning organization. And then we have specific ways that we work with different groups of people. So for example, as you might imagine, in an insurance company, actuaries play a very big role. Actuaries have been around, I believe, since the 1700s. Some people would say their jobs haven't changed much since then. But with the advent of the data that we have available to us now, their jobs really are changing, because we're shifting, insurance companies are shifting more to data analytics than, let's say, the sampling techniques actuaries used to use. So General Assembly actually helped us put together a course for our actuaries to help them become data analysts. And it was a very rigorous, intensive course. They spent 10 hours a week at work and 10 hours a week at home studying for a year. And we've had some very successful graduates of that course go on not only to work in our data analytics area, but just to be able to apply data in their everyday job much easier. So that's kind of a very intense example of what we've done in reskilling. Another thing that we're piloting right now is frontline employees, employees who are answering the phone in call centers. We're piloting retraining them to be coders. So as their jobs become more automated, they have a chance to move on to another field, another area inside the company where there are lots of growth opportunities.
Yeah, and what I love about what you shared, Deanna, is that it's a mix of the employee and the organization being jointly responsible. So encouraging people to put their learning in their own hands, but then also making lots of opportunities for them available within the organization. And I think that's the only way that it can work effectively, is if both parties are owning this quest for learning. So I have one more question, which I will start with you, Deanna, and then I'll also turn to Ranjit and Lisa around this. And I guess it's for those companies, and many of the folks joining us today might be in this category, but for those companies who simply aren't there yet, what would you say is the cost of not investing in your employees' development? And maybe what advice would you have for people joining today who might have the job of convincing the decision makers or trying to influence in some way?
Well, other CEOs, other people, when they hear this story, often say to me, well, what if I spend all this money on training? What if I train people and then they leave? And I say, what happens if you don't train people and they stay? Which usually it gets people to think. This is a business investment, and it's really core to your company's future. But it is a different way of thinking, and I would give the advice to someone who's trying to make change within their organization to start small. Start small, use the resources you have, pilot, and show some progress, and then move on from there.
Yeah, great. And Lisa, I'll come to you now. And any other thoughts on particularly on the costs of not investing in employees in this way? And again, any advice that you might have?
I think I probably would have answered that question differently if we were having this conversation in January. We started the year with one of the tightest labor markets in recent history, with the conversation about the war for talent was really hot, and that was driving up recruiting costs and creating fierce competition for in-demand workers with these hard-to-get digital skills and data science and software engineering, UX, etc. And that actually remains the case, that competition and that need for those sorts of skills for a company to stay relevant, competitive, and able to navigate increasing volatility is going to require constant and intentional management of the skills of one's workforce. But on top of all that, we now have the volatility brought by and the fallout and the aftershocks brought about by the pandemic. And so, was reported in the New York Times last week, the Labor Department announced that 2.4 million people have been locked out of work for about 27 weeks or more, and an even bigger surge is on the way, and nearly 5 million people are approaching long-term joblessness over the next 2 months. And so while, from one week to another, there's, the occasional bright spot, permanent job losses are likely to spike soon, and that has a real cost to individuals, to markets, to the economy, and that will have long-lasting consequences for businesses and workers. And so the reason I bring that up is to say that, as companies adapt to both the effects of digital disruption and a world forever impacted by this pandemic, it actually creates a really unique opportunity for business leaders to now succeed on talent on two fronts. So first, it's to do, as Deanna's great example spoke to, develop their existing teams who may have the competencies and capabilities to change roles if simply given the chance to learn those new resilient skills. The Guardian example is a terrific one. She talked about the actuaries and the traditional marketers that they gave data science and digital marketing capabilities to increase their ability to really leverage talent that they already had. But on the other front, I think there's an opportunity for companies to start to develop new sources of talent. People who have lost their livelihoods as a result of this pandemic, but who are eager to get their foot in the door and are often taking it upon themselves to reskill through programs like the one that we offer at GA. I'll use the example of Humana, who has been a leader in their hometown of Louisville, Kentucky for decades. In response to this crisis, they're working with us, with Microsoft, and with other local education and training providers to get individuals who've lost their jobs due to the virus into training programs in data analytics and in digital marketing. And so beyond the immediate benefits for displaced workers, that investment also means that they've got a larger addressable market for skills that remain in high demand.
Great, that's super, Lisa. I think really compelling business case there, and we've had some responses through already endorsing that. Ranjit, anything to add on this point of the business case for investing in people in this way?
Yeah, absolutely, MC, and really want to build on what Deanna and Lisa just mentioned and pick up on the business case, right? I think if you listen and look at most large organizations, these organizations are facing a big skill shift, right? Where maybe 30 to 40% of the workforce will not have the right skill sets in a couple of years from now. And even if the labor market has changed a little in the last 6 months, right? It's fair to say, there is no organization that can plug that skills gap with a very traditional fire and hire approach. Right? So I think there is a very clear-cut case there that if you want to be able to retain or have the right skill set within your organization, and you want to do that in both a way which protects your reputation, but is also which you can finance, you're going to have to reskill, upskill, second skill your workforce. I think the other aspect which we haven't really touched upon so far are the soft skills, right? So we spoke a lot about reskilling, upskilling from a hard skill point of view, right? And yes, coding is super important, but in a workplace which is getting to be more and more automated, the truly human skills of empathy, of problem solving, those human skills are going to be key competitive differentiators. Right? And so every company needs to be thinking of how can they actually, skill their people around those key skills. And so I think, again, that provides a pretty clear-cut business case for why we need to be investing into our employees.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to your last point, Ranjit, I mean, I often, as an organizational psychologist myself, I often get asked the question about, will we even have a place for soft skills in the future as so much more becomes driven by technology and automation? And my view is that we're going to need those softer human skills more than ever. And things like curiosity and collaboration and agility and emotional intelligence will become even more important in a world that's more driven by technology. So I think that's a very important point. Okay, well, if that's the case for skilling the workforce, and it sounds like by the poll, many people are on board with this. Anyway, let's move on to look at then what some of the barriers can be to really developing and building this kind of culture. And again, I'm going to come to you first, Deanna, on this, and I'd love to start just by pulling out an extract from your book, a paragraph or a sentence rather that I was really taken with. And here you were talking about the need for organizations to be aligned and to have consensus. And you talked about, and this is a direct quote, not consensus regarding what needs to be done, but consensus regarding why. Not consensus regarding specific strategy, but consensus on the broad principles underlying that strategy. So I guess my question is, what steps did you take to build that consensus and that type of culture where there was alignment around putting people first?
Well, thank you, MC. I think some of the things that Lisa and Ranjit said are very applicable here. I mean, we did start with a business case and say, it's unsustainable to go on the way we've been going. We have to upskill people and train them for the new world. In our culture where we put people first, it would not be, our first move to fire people and hire new ones. We have to reskill the ones we have and try that first. So, it was kind of a combination of, let's put the business case out there. Let's put the values-based case and the soft case, as Ranjit might say, of empathy for our colleagues. And then let's start small. Changing culture. We have almost 10,000 people in our organization all across the US and in India. It's really hard to change a culture like that overnight. We have to start small and get small wins. And if you are listening today and your leadership or executive team isn't yet at this point, I think you can always start with yourself, right? You can display a willingness to learn new things, and you can learn new things and show that you can do more, and you can recruit your colleagues and, build a small coalition of the willing to say, look at what my team can do, and go from there.
Yeah, great. I love that, Deanna. And Lisa, building on that, I mean, it might be this barrier around consensus, but it could be another. Are there other barriers that you see to building a culture where people are seen as we talk about at LHH, renewable rather than replaceable? Any thoughts on other barriers?
Yeah, I mean, one that Deanna and Ranjit and I were talking about before this call was a certain sort of risk aversion of, taking people who maybe are not from a more traditionally aligned background. And so, that really speaks to, I think, employer perceptions than it does the reality of the actual skills and readiness of workers. We believe that all companies would be well served to start, moving away from hiring based on, let's say, historic or traditional proxies like a degree from a brand name college, and instead really zero in on skills and competencies. And we coach the people that are going through our own upskilling and reskilling programs to draw on their past experience, whether it's working in a non-tech role or serving in the military, for example, and to demonstrate their capabilities. Because we know that works. We've placed over 10,000 career changers in jobs in high demand tech fields, and the outcomes have truly been extraordinary for both employer and employees.
Yeah, great. And Ranji, any other points from you in terms of the barriers and thoughts on overcoming them?
Yeah, I think one key barrier is how you approach transformation, and that most companies have to approach transformation in a self-funding way, right? And typically that means that you start with cutting cost. And that's what I would call, the pain curve, right? You've got to cut the cost, you need to restructure, and that is absolutely justifiable. But if you stick on that pain curve, right, and never get onto the gain curve in terms of building the narrative of how we're going to grow and build the capabilities for the future, then you're never going to be able to pull through the transformation. And I think that is one of the key challenges and barriers to a lot of what I'm seeing at our customers very often, right? So you are restructuring, you're cutting cost. You might start actually to invest into data capabilities, into a data lake. But if you're not investing into your people and making them data literate, for example, then both the cuts and the investments you're making in technology are not really going to come to fruition, right, in terms of giving you a return. So I think really thinking through that, yes, you need to go on the pain curve, but you also need to be able to make that jump onto the gain curve at the right moment in time. I think that is a critical barrier to overcome.
Yeah, and a shift in mindset in many ways. And I know certainly a theme we've heard a lot from clients is the need to build a growth mindset within the organization. And Deanna, I know again this was something that you really promoted at Guardian Life. So I don't know if you'd want to say a few words just about how you inspired and grew that type of mindset within the organization.
Yes, thanks, MC. We did talk a lot with our people about the value of a growth mindset. In our leadership offsites and a lot of our meetings, we had speakers on growth mindset. We gave people, books to read and embedded it in videos. And then we moved on to, initially, we had Leader Learning Day, which was an entire day devoted just to people being able to take courses. And, they were anything from a 1.5 to 2 hour seminar to small, what we call lunch bites, little 30-minute video clips that people can, watch from their desk while they're eating their brown bag lunch. And all of this focused on self-development and how you can, chart your career and what else you might need to do or learn to take the next step. That was so popular that it's now evolved into Learning Month, which August is Learning Month for the organization, where we have different activities every day around learning and growth mindset. So it is possible to change the culture to a growth mindset, but of course, none of these things happen overnight.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's that little but often approach as well. So not just a one and done, but lots of little strategies to help encourage that. Great. Well, we're almost at the Q&A time of our webinar. So please do populate your questions into the Q&A box. But before we do that, I did have another question, Ranjit, which I'll come to you first, and then Lisa, you may also have a perspective on this. And I think this is really in relation to, if you think about the shift to viewing the workplace in this way, it really it's something that has wider reaching impacts. And, particularly, I wonder, will there be an impact on higher education? And for instance, could we see a time when vocational degrees might be a thing of the past, or, what impact might we see on the way people get educated? So Ranjit, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, a couple of thoughts, MC, right? I think first off, we've talked for decades about how it's important to have lifelong learning. But I think for the first time, I'm getting the feeling that lifelong learning is really being embedded also by employers in what they do. And it comes with the realization that you cannot just expect that you leave, with a college degree and that, that's the end point to your learning. Very much like Deanna said, right? You have to have this ongoing campaign and you have to have the ongoing awareness. But that also means that the value that higher education gives you is going to have to change, right? And I think that realization is not necessarily always there at institutions of higher education. And I think COVID-19 has probably, thrown another wrinkle into that, because if people, especially in countries like the United States or Australia, where higher education is extremely expensive for the individual, if people cannot actually get the experience on campus and all those soft factors which also contribute to making that a great experience, then it raises the question, right? Why pay so much when you can get an equally impactful experience through many online providers, right? And so I think, a lot of institutions of higher education are going to have to be able to respond to that question within the broader question of, are they really preparing people for the labor market? Maybe one last thought. I think there's a great study done by Harvard around the impact of how ready graduates are for the labor market on inequality, right? And you can show that over the past 2 to 3 decades, as the institutions of higher education have been producing graduates who are less ready for the labor market, that has gone hand in hand with also growing inequality. So I think there is a broader social question also to be answered, and that's definitely going to have an impact on higher education. So Lisa, curious to hear what your point of view is.
Sure, I'm probably a little bit more bullish on higher education than you are, Ranjit. I think there will always be a place for a high quality post-secondary education at that particular stage in life where young people should be exposed to a broad diversity of disciplines, where they are exploring, where they're learning to learn, learning to collaborate, and as that ever important transition from adolescence into adulthood and into the workforce. With all that being said, the model and the ROI of higher ed profoundly needs to be rethought, and the pandemic has only exposed that in the way that it has exposed so many other things. And if you think about the sort of falling ROI of higher education, and then pair that with Ranjit very eloquently talked about, which is the pace of technological innovation speeding up, requiring people to not just get skilled once, but get skilled over and over and over again in shorter and shorter cycles over a 30, 40, 50-year career, you start to see why it's so important for for us to be really thoughtful, particularly for employers to be really thoughtful about how we ensure that the workforces that we manage are getting those refreshed skills on a regular basis.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as well, Lisa, building on what you said, it does point to as well this idea that the one blueprint does not work for everyone. And yes, there may still be people who really benefit from going through that more traditional higher education experience, but we ought to have multiple different alternatives to that, depending on that person. Okay, great. Well, the questions are absolutely flooding in. So, and we won't have time to get through them all. So I'm going to try my best to group some of them. And there's a couple here that build on what we've just been talking about, and I would say are in this theme and continuing this theme of learning culture. So the first is, we reference the importance of hiring for skills and competence over education and years experience. Question about how do you gain buy-in for that mindset, and then how do you achieve it through maybe processes or training? And then a second related question to that is, how do you introduce the idea of a learning culture? Particularly where, an organizational culture, and particularly at executive level, is about being precise and not failing and managing risk, which can, really be against this idea of experimentation and learning. So I know that was a very long 2 questions in one, but who would like to tackle that one first? Deanna, you're unmuted, so I don't know if that's a sign that you're itching to give us your
Well, sure, MC. I would answer the last part of that question first, and that is, how do you tackle this idea of a learning organization and hiring people for skills and capabilities rather than education or demonstrated experience in a culture that's highly risk averse? I think it's a bigger risk not to hire people who have a learning mindset than it is to hire people who've been doing the same thing over and over again. I think one only needs to look at how quickly the outside world is changing, and to look at the situation we find ourselves in now, where we've all had to improvise, right? We've all had to improvise over the last 9 months to accomplish things that ordinarily would have been easy to accomplish. And the people who are best at that are the people who have flexibility, who have a learning mindset. There was no job description for pandemic manager 9 months ago, right? And we all had to figure out how to do it. So I think to look to the outside world and say, the days of managing risk by having people who have done the exact precise job over and over again are gone. The world doesn't operate that way anymore. Yeah. Maybe some of my colleagues want to add to that. I don't know.
Lisa, Ranjit, any thoughts to build?
Yeah, very similar to what Deanna said, right? I think we are to a certain extent in a world where it's been, we're faced with the end of strategy, right? You cannot run a strategy top to bottom over a 3-year cycle, 4-year cycle, and cascade that down and give a, put a leader or a frontline manager in a box and tell them this is how you need to operate, right? And in a world like that, where you have to be able to give the individual frontline leader the tools to make decisions quickly, to get data from the market and really run his or her team with that data and with that decision-making framework, right? I think it is critical that people have that learning mindset, and being risk averse is the biggest risk. I would absolutely agree with that. So that is really showing how quickly the market is moving, and that you cannot survive with some of the tools which might have worked 30, 40 years ago is probably the key. Lisa, I don't know if you would add to that.
I mean, I certainly agree with what both of my colleagues have said, and I would just add, for that person who's trying to make the investment case inside an organization for the demonstrated skills approach over the sort of the pedigree approach, is just look at the data. It is extraordinarily expensive to hire, and so getting it right is critically important. And part of getting it right is really trying to shake ourselves of sort of old learned behavior of looking at sort of artificial proxies for competence, and really asking those on the kind of on our talent acquisition front lines in these organizations to use more demonstrated skills approaches to vetting talent, I think is critically important.
Yeah, great. And a theme that I think you all touched on as well was leadership behavior. And we've certainly seen that the pandemic has shone a light on maybe where our leaders are failing us, and on the need for a different set of behaviors from our leaders. And I think what's interesting is, we learned from the last recession that the organizations who had survived and thrived during that time were those who did have a different type of leadership style, and one that was more humble, that was more focused on learning, on building inclusion. But as a human race, we're not always so good at learning from the past. But I'm hoping this time that actually this has given us a chance to actually think about, well, what behaviors do we need from our leaders? So let's see. And again, a couple of questions that are linked, and Lisa, I'll come to you first for these. So with regards to, and I love how this person has put it, hopping onto the gain curve, any ideas for tools or processes to identify skills gaps or where to invest for growth? And then we also had a question about, is there an approach or a program where a company can find out what kinds of skills people need, and where to do that matching? So Ranjit, I know you will have a view on this, but I'm going to come to Lisa first.
Sure. Well, I will quickly send this over to Ranjit, because he and I've had a number of conversations, and I know that LHH in partnership with General Assembly thinks a lot about what you're broadly describing, which is how do you sort of diagnose or assess. And there are sort of two layers of assessment or of diagnostic that this question sort of triggers or tees up for me. One is at the individual level. How do employers, what kind of diagnostics and tools can employers use in order to really assess the capabilities of candidates that are coming in? And I actually would, there are certainly a number of assessment tools out there. The LHH actually delivers a few of those, but but there are actually fewer employers that are doing that assessment. And so for me, the first piece of advice is incorporate those kinds of diagnostics and those kinds of assessments. Whatever tools you choose to use is kind of the second order of business. The first order of business is committing to doing those kinds of diagnostics of candidates and of individuals. Then there's the assessment that sort of has to happen at the organizational, at the broad-based level, which is how to get very, very clear first on what are the roles and capabilities that your strategy implies, that the current state of your business suggests that you need, and getting very intentional, very clear about assessing that. And then you've got to match that up with assessing the skills and revealing the skills that already exist or that could be repurposed in your own workforce. And then it's just a matter of starting to match those up to be able to make those keen decisions around where do we need to buy talent, where do we need to build or reskill talent, because ultimately, talent remains the way that, you can have the most pristine strategy on paper, but if you don't have the exact right skill force to execute on it, then a strategy doesn't matter. So I'll turn it over to Ranjit, but I think what this questioner is asking is really critically important, and it's really about knowing what you need and knowing what you have, and being able to make decisions around that.
Yeah, no, I think you framed it up perfectly, Lisa. Just a couple of thoughts that I would add. I think that organizational assessment is critical also to lay out priorities, because you might, end up seeing, as probably as we see with many of our clients, right, that you have skill gaps across the board, but where do you start, right? And I'd be also really curious to hear from you, Deanna. How did you make some of those decisions of where to start? And I think the idea, circling back to what you had said right at the beginning, starting small and starting with a pilot is critical, right? And starting there where you think you will be able to demonstrate return very quickly. I think that is what the organizational level assessment will also help you to identify. I think the other thing at an individual level, and this is something which Lisa, your team always has a lot of focus on. It's not only around the cognitive abilities or the aptitude. It's also around attitude, right? So if you want to have people who take up an upskilling or a reskilling or a second skilling opportunity, they need to have the resilience, they need to have the willingness to pull that through. And Deanna was mentioning, how intense that is, right? And so having that willingness and the ability to the attitude to take that right to the end point, I think is also critical and also part of the assessment. So Deanna, I don't know how you identified within Guardian Life, where you would start and what were the pilots, and how was that driven there?
Well, thanks, Ranjit. And I, agree with what Lisa and Ranjit said. We started with the strategy. So we looked at the next 5 years and where we would like to be. And we saw that our markets and our customers were taking us a much different place than we had been. And therefore, the broad skills gaps became quite evident. We needed more digital skills. We needed more data analytics skills. We needed more customer experience skills. I think at times, to be honest, we struggled a little in then turning that gap into a program. General Assembly did help us quite a bit on the data analytics piece. And I think, maybe we could have used Ranjit's help in looking broadly across the organization and kind of setting up a broad program. We did start small and work out from there.
Great. Thank you, everyone. I also have a question, and Deanna, I might come to you first for this one, because I know, prior to your career at Guardian Life, you worked with organizations of all sorts of sizes, but the question is, does this pertain strictly to large corporations? And if not, what size companies are prime for training and retraining? And I know Ranjit and Lisa will have a view on this, which I expect will be consistent with yours, but any thoughts on that?
First of all, if you're asking whether this applies equally to a small organization, I would say in some ways it's more critical for a small organization to have people who are adaptable and can educate themselves and learn quickly, because small organizations sometimes don't have all the resources big companies have, but they face the same outside pressures. And I would also say this doesn't have to be a huge change program, one can start small and start with the resources that are out there. I mean, just conversations like today, you know, it's a start. It gives people the idea, the spark of how to do it. And, you know, one can go from there. I'm sure that Ranjit and Lisa are more qualified than I am to talk about all the resources that exist. But I would definitely say that small companies need to focus on people's skills and adaptability just as much, if not more, than large companies.
Yeah, and I expect, I mean, from my experience, the culture will potentially be easier to influence in those situations as well. Okay, I'm going to
And
move
if
on
I
to,
could, and I would love, I would love to just build on that, because this is this sort of large company, small, medium-sized company is actually a topic near and dear to my heart. I just would point out to the audience that, you know, based on, you know, the data that we collect, you know, spending per employee is actually higher right now for sort of mid-tier and smaller companies. Those size companies are actually increasing the amount of money that they're investing in talent. It's actually the largest companies that are spending less, or that have experienced a recent slight decline in their investment in training and employees. So you know, so we can't always assume that it's the largest companies that are doing the innovating and the leading. There's actually some terrific innovation that's happening in the smaller and mid-sized tier companies that I think the largest companies could model.
yeah, great. Thank you, Lisa. We are almost out of time, and there's a couple of really good ones here. So this is an interesting question. So we talked about reskilling and, for instance, employees learning coding or digital marketing skills. And the question here is, what if you've got employees who aren't interested in learning new skills, or it doesn't align with their, you know, the skills that you need them to perhaps learn are not aligned with their own ambitions or their own interests? How do you address that? So we have spent quite a bit of time talking about the organization's responsibility and the role of the leader, but what if the employee isn't on board? Any thoughts on that from any of you?
I mean, I can certainly start. So I think that what often causes that sort of ambiguity or disinterest on the part of employees when they're asked by their employer to go through a training program is usually when they don't see the benefit. They don't see how a training that they're being asked to complete is tied to the overall strategy of the organization, the mission of the organization, or to their role. So I think being able to demonstrate the relevance is, you know, it's really incumbent upon both the employer and of the, you know, of the program provider, the trainer, to really, you know, reveal and identify and make clear to employees what the, you know, what the purpose is, what the intention, and how this is aligned to their work. And then on the other side, on the employee side, I would say, you know, it's just an undeniable fact that that to have a successful career over decades in this century is going to require constantly cultivating and renewing and refreshing one's skills. And so, you know, I think the ones who are excited about that and crave lifelong learning and search for those opportunities both inside and outside of their jobs are the ones who are going to really thrive and outperform ultimately those that don't.
Great. Anything to add, Raji or Deanna? Anything from your experience? Did you have a population of people that it took a little bit longer to get on board at Guardian?
Well, I agree with what Lisa said. It's important to demonstrate the why here, but also I think when you have employees who are resistant, sometimes it's just fear. Sometimes they're afraid that they're not going to be able to learn. They haven't done it in a long time. So I think then structuring something that's fun and easy and kind of fail-proof in the beginning and working up from there. I see Ranjit nodding his head. I'm sure he has more to say here, is a way to go.
Yeah, I would fully agree, Deanna, right? And I think one of the issues, and this is really important for the, for the HR community to, I think, reflect on, is a lot of learning within organizations has not been very attractive for the employee and not fun, as you said, Deanna, right? And I think the benchmark that most people have for things which are fun are not necessarily, learning in other companies, right? It is what we enjoy in terms of, the apps which really work and the experience you get through using Netflix, and those kind of experiences need to be replicated when you talk about learning in the organization. It needs to be on demand. It needs to be an amazing user experience. And I think that will create both the stickiness and actually, make it attractive for people to learn and take some of the fear away. So yes, that's why I was furiously nodding the other way you said that.
Yeah, and I often think well-designed learning shouldn't even feel like learning, in inverted commas. So yeah, absolutely. Okay, we are almost at the top of the hour, so we'll begin to wrap up our time. Thank you to everyone who sent in the really great questions. And one final one from me, and I'm really going to test you on time here. So what I would love is just one takeaway that you can share that will help leaders write a new playbook to close this skills gap or to build a future-proofed workforce. What would be your one takeaway from today to the folks joining on our webinar? And Ranjit, I'm going to come to you first this time.
Thank you, MC, and thanks for throwing out the challenge. What I would say is you have to build your business case around the pain and the gain curve, right? So understanding what the pain curve looks like and how that is going to provide you with funds to get onto the gain curve, or hop on the gain curve, as somebody said in the Q&A.
Great, thank you, Ranjit. And Lisa, we'll come to you next for your one takeaway.
Sure. I'll emphasize one that's already come up, which is, focus on investing not just in new talent, but in your existing talent. That's my one takeaway.
And finally, Deanna, final word from you, final takeaway.
I would say don't give up. This is major change. Expect it to be hard. You might fail at first, but keep trying because the results are worth it. Your employees and your customers are depending on you to get this right eventually.
Yeah, great. I love it, Deanna. That's a great one to finish on. And thank you to all of you. We really appreciate the participation today. The time has flown by, which is always a sign of a great conversation. Thank you also for all of you who took the time out today to join. We hope this has been helpful and you've had some good takeaways in your efforts to build a future-proofed workforce. We have added a link to in the chat to learn more about Deanna's forthcoming book, which, as I said, I highly recommend. Higher Purpose: How Smart Companies Can Close the Skills Gap. And we'll be following up with a link to the recording as well if you want to listen back to anything. And by all means, do reach out to us at LHH or to General Assembly for any advice or to talk about the strategies that will help your company build a fit for future workforce. So thank you from me for joining, and have a good rest of your day.